So, turning gently towards the subject matter for the Dhamma talk today, what I've been doing with a sort of series of talks I've been giving is working gradually through a series of practices and what are known as blessings from a particular scripture in Buddhism known as the Mangala Sutta. And it is sometimes described as having 38 blessings. And as we have reached number 19 today, then you notice that we are about halfway through. Another way of describing the blessings within that is to put them into little subgroupings where you have 10 levels which you're working through. And again, we are about halfway through because we have already dealt with 5 of those groupings of the 10, and we move on to number 6 today. And it's sort of fitting that we are restarting the classes at this point because from now on in the talks I'm giving, the emphasis is a little bit different as compared with what has gone before. Up until this point, we've always been dealing with our habits, overt habits in our lives, the sort of things which we are dealing with in everyday life. But from this point onwards, it tends to get a little bit more internal, where we're dealing with the qualities in our mind or the virtues within the mind itself. And this will continue from this blessing 19 all the way up to number 38. And generally the way I present the topics are that I spend 2 sessions on each. So we get the first half of blessing 19 today, which is entitled Abstaining from Unwholesomeness, or to make it a little bit more sort of relevant to everyday life, putting temptations behind us. But what we find in this particular grouping is that we start with abstaining from unwholesomeness, then we deal with restraint from drinking intoxicants, and then the last one is non-recklessness in the Dharma. So the sort of temptations we are dealing with today are temptations without physical dependency. Next time, two sessions time, blessing 20 is more on intoxicants which you can characterize as temptations which include some sort of physical dependency. And then the last one is to do with making full use of the Dhamma teachings available to us. So, what we know about the mind, especially having meditated, is that the mind is fickle, easily changed. A person who has all the best of intentions today can easily relapse into bad behavior tomorrow if their mind has not been cultivated to the point where it is steadfast. So once we realize that the mind has this sort of weaknesses, it implies that we have to upgrade our mind continuously towards something better. And one day, if we're really lucky, if we want to get beyond the point of slipping back anymore, then we have to reach a certain sort of landmark in our spiritual practice. And within Buddhism, this is sometimes known as the point of stream entry, the Sotapanna attainment, which is known as an initial degree of enlightenment. And if you haven't reached that point, then we can never fully trust our own mind that we're not going to someday slip backwards. Sometimes it's compared to climbing up a tree. And most trees have got no branches right at the bottom, right? You have to get quite a lot way up the trunk before you get to your first branch, which you can cling onto and be sure that you're not going to slip back anymore. And the equivalent of that in our meditation practice is getting to the first branch of the Sotapanna, or the stream entry attainment. Or failing that, at the very least, to get to the point where we have some sort of inner body of enlightenment, or Dhammakaya, which will sort of take care of our sense of conscience for us. And if we make no effort, well, we can just slide straight back down the tree trunk. And Unfortunately, although we have lots of great intentions to be a better person and do great things for the world, there are lots of other things which can sort of distort our good intentions into things which will make our life much more unsatisfactory. And sometimes I've talked about these as gremlins, these little things in our mind, in our physical makeup, which sort of have got it in for us. If we didn't try to do anything good in our lives, then they would leave us right alone. But with all our good intentions and efforts, then we make ourselves a target for these gremlins, demons in our lives that tend to sneak up on us and make sure that no good deed goes unpunished. Yes. So the weaknesses of our mind, or kilesa mara, the weaknesses in our body, or kanda mara, any damage to our reputation, or abhisankara mara, troublemakers, or devaputta mara, and death, or the fear of death, majjumara. And if we don't make any effort, then our whole life is like being a puppet to these ones pulling the strings for us. Because generally left to our own devices, we tend to do the easy thing rather than the noble thing. But at this point in the cultivation of blessings, really we should have gone beyond that, where we are now looking to do only the noble thing rather than the easy thing in our lives anymore. So the sort of thing which they tend to put in our way in order to get us to revert to our old ways of thinking are collectively known as temptations of various sorts, to sort of lure us back into our old and easy ways of doing things instead of doing the best thing or trying to upgrade ourselves at every opportunity. So at this point in the blessings, we try to draw the line under any unwholesomeness or to turn away from any temptations that are put in our path. In the previous blessings, we might have considered it still to be a work in progress, but at this point, we try to keep ourselves at a point where we're not going to succumb to any of those sort of temptations anymore. So at this point, hopefully, the demons we're dealing with should no longer be serious ones, not on the level of like cheating on a spouse or shoplifting, but to be called unwholesomeness, it must still be fairly serious, maybe on the level of like flirting, or being a shopaholic, or skipping off work early, or succumbing to cheesecake when you're supposed to be on a diet. And here I'm not talking about things like alcohol, because we'll come back to that specifically in number 20. And I'm also going to not deal with the Christian approach to dealing with temptation, where it tends to be thought of as more singular or demonic. But to give Christians credit where it's due, they do seem to have a lot of expertise in this department, which we can also learn from. Nonetheless, I will stick to insight from Western psychology and counseling, which in the initial section today will deal with the sort of grosser forms. And quite a lot of life hacks are available for us to learn from. And later on, after we've looked at these ones, then we can go a little deeper, a little more into the subconscious side of temptations from the Buddhist point of view. So today we will look at the sort of life hacks which can help us to deal with the grosser side of temptations. And examples of the sort of situations I'm talking about, it's where you feel the pull of a temptation. It might be a scenario of a guy sitting at a singles bar and being careful not to look about too much in case he catches the eye of any woman, which might spell trouble for him. And instead of succumbing, he finishes his Diet Coke and heads home to his loving fiancée. or maybe Diet Coke, yes. Otherwise, yes, he'd be get it in the neck in blessing number 20, yes. Or a lady going strong at 3 weeks into her diet with 5 pounds down and no delicious decadent desserts or calorie-ridden snacks at this point. But tonight, the cravings threaten to ruin all her good work because she's at her favorite restaurant celebrating a friend's promotion, and all she can think about is the restaurant's famous chocolate lava cake. But in this case, she gives in and indulges in the mouth-watering dessert. So, if you are prepared for temptations, the idea is that you would be more able to overcome the ones you need to than if you are unprepared. So, as scary as they may seem, it's a lot easier to resist if you have some idea what to expect. So, most of the 10 ways I'll deal with today are things that you can do to circumvent trouble if you know what your temptations are. So, the sort of ones we're talking about are recognizing potential triggers, staying away from risky situations, avoid giving yourself a choice, making concrete plans, enlisting a buddy, using technology, building skills through practice, and only occasionally indulging yourself. So let's see what we can do in this department. First piece of advice to avoid temptations is to recognize the potential triggers, because it's mostly about self-control. Then tempting situations are often situations where you're going for immediate gratification instead of thinking about long-term goals. So let's say you're on a diet, you might be tempted to eat the cheesecake that's beckoning at you from the deli case. So immediate gratification would lead to giving in, but thinking about a long-term goal would be to avoid those sort of foods. If you know what's likely to trigger you, then you can try to avoid the situation. Maybe old flames turning up in your life. You can avoid the situation by meeting in a public setting, for example. Or if you think about your long-term plans at work, then maybe sneaking out early on a Friday afternoon is not a good idea, because it might not seem like a great big deal to you, but your boss is going to notice, and eventually you're going to be written off as someone who can't be trusted with responsibility. So, long-term thinking. Second piece of advice, stay away from risky situations. If you know what's going to trigger you, then out of sight, out of mind may help you. Say you're on a diet, then maybe the first thing you need to do is to chuck out everything, the remnants of everything that's likely to tempt you off your diet, so that you don't have a handful of crisps every time you walk past the pantry, or a spoonful of ice cream every time you walk past the freezer. If it's significant others who you're likely to cheat on, then maybe just have a family email instead of a personal one, or have a profile picture with your partner and child displayed. Yes. You might also try visualizing yourself avoiding your pet temptation, like a little rehearsal. You might picture yourself noticing or touching the tempting thing before putting it back and walking away. Not convinced? Like chocolate bar, whatever. But this would not work for intoxicants, generally speaking. Yeah. And you can avoid giving yourself a choice. Remove a choice from the equation. In Thai, they have a funny expression, not letting down the drawbridge of your castle. Didn't get that one? If you got your castle, it's like easy to defend when the doors are up, right? But the moment you let down your drawbridge, then you expose yourself to risk. Yes. So if you know that you are not your diet, then try to avoid the holiday parties with sweets and rich food. And you can make concrete plans like, I will replace cheesecake with an apple at every opportunity. No? I think we have a lot of cheesecake fans here. Okay. But if you frame it in terms of if-then, then it will be helpful to you. You can also enlist the help of a buddy who is not subject to the same temptation to act as a sort of sponsor to keep you to your commitment. Obviously, you need to be honest for this to work. If you're still in denial, then it won't work. And if you ask your partner or buddy to help to remind you when they see you being sort of umming and erring about whether to go for it, then that's usually quite effective. And you can also, even if they are into the same sort of workout regime or whatever, you can even compete with them to see who can do better instead of putting all the focus on negative things. Number 7 these days, you can make use of available technology. For example, use budgeting software to monitor your spending. Or if you're watching your weight, have a phone app that keeps tabs on what you're eating or your weight, or an app with a graph. And it might be able to point out things you didn't know before, like, for example, you tend to eat more or overindulge at the weekends. And build up your skills through practice or rehearsal. For example, you might try saying no to easy things, like to sort of build up those muscles first of all. Like, for example, just sort of change your routine slightly. For example, if you usually brush your teeth starting on the right, then start on the left and remind yourself to keep doing that, to bring a sense of awareness back into life, which you can then apply to more serious things. Or you can get yourself to wake up a little earlier each day so that you can have a proper breakfast instead of donuts. Yes. So you build up these self-control muscles. And last but not least, you may indulge yourself occasionally. Obviously not good for intoxicants or shoplifting, but generally you tend to crave what we can't have. So the more unavailable or forbidden it is, the more we obsess about it. So the trick is to allow yourself certain things in moderation. A cheat meal now and then, for example, if you're on a diet. But you shouldn't do that 2 days in a row. Okay. And if, despite your best intentions, you are still confronted by your pet temptation, then you ought to have a plan for distracting yourself, or just simply walk away. And suggestions for distracting yourself are watching Netflix all day. Maybe you develop a new set of temptations, I don't know. Or just go out and jog. Yes. So you have your distraction plan in place. So in conclusion, it's not about desiring something that's often not right or not good for you. Because they can, giving into something in the short term leads to problems in the long term. It also leads you to feel guilty or upset or value yourself less in the long term. So it's better to resist them upfront if you can. Turning more to the Buddhist way of looking at these things. So we've called unwholesomeness temptations here, but in truth it goes a little bit deeper than just temptations, because it is anything that detracts from the quality of our mind. It's just saying that up front, it probably is too nebulous to really focus on how that might affect you in life. The actual word that's used for this in the scriptures is the word papa, which has a much broader scope of meaning than just temptation. It can refer to unfashionable things like sin and evil and wickedness, but these tend to be rather unhelpful to us, generally speaking, because they just imply a lot of judgment, and rather than indicating a way to fix the problem. So just as the sort of etymology of this word papa also implies malfunction, so as in malfunction of the mind. So it's like your mind is not working at full efficiency when it's under the influence of this thing. So when the mind malfunctions, it takes on unpleasant qualities, like cruelty or impurity or just diminished quality. So anything that detracts from quality of mind could be referred to as unwholesome, or this papa word, which we are trying to avoid in this blessing. And what does it do to your mind? Well, it does all the opposite things of what merit does to your mind. You know about merit? Warm, fuzzy feeling in the mind. When you do something good, you feel good inside yourself too. Well, giving into temptation does all the opposite things to your mind. If you can imagine that sort of getting a sort of a heavy coating of gunk in your mind that prevents your mind from working fully. Yeah? So what actually does it do? It causes clouding of the mind. So on the level of the mind itself, instability, inflexibility, diminished radiance, reduced potential, faulty decision-making, and lack of thoroughness. If you let that spread out to the level of your personality, then it will lead to things like clumsiness, grosser sort of tastes and values in life, character flaws, insensitive speech, impatience, lack of self-control, and anxiety. Further outwards, onto the level of lifestyle, it causes failure or condemnation, misfortune, disappointment. And on the level of society, if everyone's doing it, then collective sorrow, disharmony, injustice, conflict, social stagnation, and hardship. So what we're dealing with here, the word papa, they offer two solutions, one of which is arati, which means giving it up. The second one is virati, which is not picking up any new ones. So avoiding stuff that's bad from your past, not picking up anything new that you haven't already picked up before. So, Buddhist strategies for gross unwholesomeness. And we're going to deal with gross, medium, subtle. But medium and subtle I'll talk about more next time. Ways to deal with gross unwholesomeness would be the things generally covered by the precepts. So the precepts would be the main antidote to deal with killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying. Apart from that, we also have this category of what are known as roads to ruin, 6 of them: alcohol, roaming the streets at unseemly hours, which is a euphemism for, come on, you can remember something surely, visiting red light districts, basically. I need to explain what red lights are. Okay, it's what they have when you don't have mini roundabouts, yes. Obsession with entertainment or sport. For example, people who play video games all day and all night also is a road to ruin, or gambling, lotteries, associated with bad company, especially people who do all the above, and laziness generally. So, gross unwholesomeness to avoid. Precepts I've mentioned as a way to overcome these gross unwholesomenesses in one's life. And to give a little bit of a reminder, going back to blessing number 9, precepts are not the only way to overcome these sorts of problems, but they are generally the most reliable for those who aren't yet enlightened. There is also a way of just using your conscience, which means take each situation as it arises. So if you come across a situation, then you just use your hopefully accurate conscience to decide what to do in that situation. That would be known as situational avoidance, or sampata virat. Generally though, because our conscience is not perfect, and sometimes we can't keep up with the situations, or we don't realize the gravity of the situation that we have found ourselves in at the time, then precepts generally are a good sort of ready-made list of things to avoid. As for those who have made their way up the tree to the first branch, then they have the luxury of a third way, which is called transcendental avoidance, or samucceta virat, which means basically once you have reached a point of purity in your meditation, which is no longer going to slip away from you anymore, then the intention to do bad things in your life no longer arises for you anymore. And you remember back to the story of Kukumita, the hunter's wife, who laid out the weapons for him every morning, but had no intention that it would be used for anything unwholesome, because she had already attained that stream entry. So generally, the precepts are the main way to overcome the gross sorts of unwholesomeness or temptations in life. Today I'll finish off with a quick story. It's one of transcendental avoidance of gross unwholesomeness. During the time of the Buddha, many people had no education or real worldly knowledge at all. So many were completely illiterate and belonged to the lowest of professions in that caste system. But they had a good fortune to be around at a time when they had the chance to learn something directly from the Buddha. And because of being contemporary to the Buddha, they were able to attain that first branch of the way up the tree, or stream entry. And one such person was a guy called Ariya. And the name Ariya, any idea what it means? Ariya Satya. Ariya. It basically means noble, or a noble one. Yeah, Ariya. So this guy's name was Mr. Noble, okay? But he happened to be a fisherman through probably no fault of his own. And he lived at the same time as the Buddha. And basically, because he was a fisherman, then his livelihood involved breaking the first precept every day. And one day, when the Buddha was meditating early in the morning, into his meditation arose the picture of Mr. Ariya fishing. But the Buddha realized that this guy had the potential for enlightenment, if only he could be persuaded to do otherwise. So he would be able to attain that stream entry if the Buddha was able to intervene. So that day the Buddha went to where he was needed, and with all his other fellow monks he went along the shoreline to where Mr. Ariya was fishing. And when he saw the Buddha coming from a distance, he became ashamed and hid his fishing rod. And when the Buddha arrived on the scene, he didn't talk immediately to Mr. Ariya, but he turned around and he started asking each of the monks what their name was. So he made a show of asking Sariputta what his name was, and Sariputta said Sariputta. And then the Buddha went down the line of monks asking the monks, what is your name? What is your name? And overhearing the conversation, the fisherman started to ask if he's going to ask me my name. And sure enough, when he'd finished asking all the monks, he turned to the fisherman and he said, what's your name then? And he said, my name is Ariya, Mr. Noble. And in fact, the Buddha didn't need to be told the man's name. He worked it all out in advance, how he's going to hold this conversation with the guy. And the Buddha said that anyone who still harms living beings could not really be considered to live up to the name noble on account of their actions. And he said that one's nobility comes not from not harming living beings. And just hearing those words, Mr. Noble, or Mr. Ariya, he attained stream entry, and from that time on, he never had the inclination to kill living beings ever again. So probably went to sell carrots or something instead. Yes. Because he transcended the very intention to kill from that time onwards. Yeah. So this is one example of the transcendental way of overcoming the inclination to do what one is tempted to do. To finish off with some publicity for today, I would like to encourage any of you who found meditation useful today, or at least have some potential, to practice further using the meditation technique you learned today, maybe just for 20 minutes at home if you can each day, early in the morning, lasting at night, depending on when you are likely to have the most peaceful time, uninterrupted time to meditate. And little by little, you will accumulate the familiarity with the center of the body in a way that you can go further and faster in your meditation each day. Some days may be harder, some days may be easier, but if you keep going anyway, then on aggregate, then you'll see some progress in your meditation little by little. If you forget how to meditate, there is always the MindGem app for that, which you can download onto your mobile phone, and hear meditation instruction, which you can follow along with and even time yourself meditation as well. Usually this will work well for about 7 days, and then the sort of inclination to meditation goes the way of all other temptations and will wear off, at which point you can come back and join one of our classes, which are now up and running again. Tuesday is a slightly shorter meditation, 30 minutes. Every Thursday, a slightly longer meditation, 45 minutes, with a Dhamma talk each time. And the monks here take it in turns to give the teachings. Apart from that, we have the remnant of the pandemic teachings every Saturday still throughout Europe, the DMEU classes between 7 and 8 p.m. each day on British time, and the Zoom coordinates are there for anyone who's interested. But sometimes it's good to meditate from the comfort of one's home, and also you get to meet up with lots of interesting European meditators as well, and lately some Brazilians and Americans as well. I don't know how they manage it time-wise. Coming up on Saturday, the 10th of September, it's Full Moon Day, and this time round we'll have a little celebration in person, also online as well, between 7 and 8:30. It also happens to be the day our founder of our tradition, the monk you can see in the gold there, he was able to attain the inner body of enlightenment for the first time. So we have mentioned him for sure as well. So Harvest Moon and Founders Day. And for those who aren't already aware, we have a meditation retreat coming up in mid-September, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, finishing in the afternoon here. So you can sleep here, right or left. And some people said if you're afraid of snoring, you can bring your own tent Yes, the weather is still warm enough for that, and at the very reasonable price of only £75 for the weekend. So if you are undergoing a cost of living crisis, then you may find it's cheaper to come and keep 8 precepts at the temple than it is to heat your home for that weekend.